The fluorescent lights of Valdoria International Airport flickered overhead as Detective Sarah Chun reviewed the morning security reports. It was supposed to be another routine Tuesday, but the universe had different plans. At precisely 9:47 a.m., the advanced X-ray scanner in Terminal C detected something unusual in the luggage of a VIP passenger traveling under diplomatic immunity. Lady Catherine Wyndham, a distant cousin of Queen Isabella and a respected member of the royal household, stood calmly beside the security checkpoint. Her designer luggage sat motionless on the conveyor belt while technicians studied the screen with growing concern. The scanner revealed dense, metallic objects wrapped carefully within what appeared to be clothing and personal items. Sarah approached the scene with measured steps. Lady Catherine's reputation preceded her. She was known for her charity work and dedication to preserving Valdoria's cultural heritage. However, the images on the security monitor told a different story. Hidden beneath layers of silk scarves and evening gowns were unmistakable shapes that matched descriptions from a confidential alert issued just hours earlier. The royal palace had quietly reported several priceless artifacts missing from the crown collection. Among them were the Meridian Emerald, a gem the size of a robin's egg that once belonged to Valdoria's founding queen, and the Golden Scepter of Ages, a ceremonial piece crafted in the 14th century. The missing items had been discovered during a routine inventory check, but the palace had requested absolute discretion to avoid public scandal. "Your ladyship," Sarah began diplomatically, "we need to conduct a routine inspection of your luggage. It's standard procedure for all diplomatic passengers." Lady Catherine's composure never wavered. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her blue eyes showed no trace of concern. "Of course, Detective. I understand you're simply doing your job. Though I must say, I'm rather pressed for time. My flight to Geneva leaves in less than 2 hours." As the security team carefully opened the first suitcase, Sarah watched Catherine's face for any sign of nervousness. The lady maintained perfect poise, even as the team revealed layers of bubble wrap and velvet cloth. But when they uncovered the first artifact, a golden chalice adorned with precious stones, the atmosphere in the security area became electric with tension. "Lady Catherine," Sarah said slowly, "this appears to be the ceremonial chalice of Saint Valdora. According to our records, this piece should be in the royal treasury." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed Catherine's features, perhaps surprise, or maybe calculation. "I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding, Detective. I was asked by the Queen's cultural advisor to transport these pieces to Geneva for authentication by international experts. It's all quite legitimate, I assure you." The explanation sounded plausible, but Sarah's instincts told her otherwise. In her 15 years of security work, she had learned to trust those instincts. She signaled to her team to continue the search while placing a discreet call to the royal palace to verify Catherine's story. As more artifacts emerged from the luggage, each one more valuable than the last, a small crowd of curious airport staff began to gather at a respectful distance. The discovery included intricately carved jade figurines, ancient gold coins, and a jeweled dagger that gleamed under the terminal's bright lights. Each piece was wrapped with meticulous care, suggesting someone with extensive knowledge of artifact preservation. The phone call to the palace yielded disturbing results. Queen Isabella's private secretary confirmed that no such authentication mission had been authorized. Moreover, the Queen herself was reportedly unaware that any artifacts had left the palace grounds. The secretary promised to send someone immediately to verify the item's authenticity. Sarah returned to find Lady Catherine checking her watch with increasing frequency. The elegant facade was beginning to show hairline cracks. When informed that the palace had no record of an authentication mission, Catherine's response was swift and practiced. "There seems to be some confusion in the palace communications," she said smoothly. "Perhaps we should contact Prince Alexander directly. He's overseeing this particular project, and I'm certain he can clarify the situation." The mention of Prince Alexander added another layer of complexity to the investigation. As Queen Isabella's nephew and third in line to the throne, Alexander had both access to the royal collections and the authority to authorize their movement. However, Sarah's research had revealed some concerning information about the prince's recent financial troubles and his association with questionable art dealers. While waiting for palace representatives to arrive, Sarah decided to examine the artifacts more closely. Her trained eye noticed several details that seemed inconsistent with typical royal collection protocols. The wrapping materials were of museum quality, but The identification tags were handwritten rather than bearing the official palace inventory stamps. Additionally, some pieces showed signs of recent cleaning and polishing, as if someone had prepared them specifically for transport. Marcus Thornfield, the airport's consulting art historian, arrived to provide expert analysis. His reputation for identifying forgeries and stolen artifacts made him an invaluable resource in unusual cases like this. As he examined each piece under portable UV lights and magnification equipment, his expression grew increasingly serious. "These are definitely authentic pieces from the royal collection," Marcus confirmed. "The craftsmanship and historical patina are unmistakable. However, I'm troubled by something else entirely." He pointed to barely visible markings on the base of the golden chalice. "These catalog numbers don't match the standard royal inventory system. It's as if someone has been maintaining a separate record of these items." The implications were staggering. If Marcus was correct, the theft might not be an impulsive crime, but part of a larger, more systematic operation. Sarah realized she might be dealing with something far more complex than a simple case of royal artifact theft. As the investigation continued, Lady Catherine's demeanor began to shift subtly. The confident aristocrat who had first approached the security checkpoint was gradually being replaced by someone more guarded and calculating. When asked about the catalog numbers Marcus had discovered, she claimed ignorance, but her body language suggested otherwise. The arrival of Sir Geoffrey Blackwood, the Queen's Master of Collections, marked a turning point in the investigation. His grim expression as he identified each artifact confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Not only were the pieces authentic and stolen, but they represented some of the most historically significant items in the royal collection. "Detective Chun," Sir Geoffrey said quietly, pulling her aside, "I must inform you that these aren't the only pieces missing. We've discovered gaps in several other collection categories. I fear we may be dealing with thefts spanning several months, possibly longer." The scope of the crime was expanding exponentially. What had begun as a routine security check was revealing what appeared to be the largest royal theft in Valdoria's history. Sarah knew that the next few hours would be critical in determining not only Lady Catherine's guilt, but also the extent of the conspiracy. As the first part of this extraordinary case concluded, one question dominated Sarah's thoughts. How deep did this royal conspiracy go? And who else might be involved in systematically looting the crown's most precious treasures? The interrogation room at Valdoria International Airport had never hosted someone of Lady Catherine's social standing. As she sat across from Detective Sarah Chun, her perfectly manicured fingers drummed silently against the polished table. The stark fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across her aristocratic features, revealing stress lines that her usual confident demeanor had previously concealed. Sarah had spent the previous hour reviewing Lady Catherine's background with her team. Born Catherine Elizabeth Montrose, she had married into the Wyndham family at age 22, gaining both wealth and proximity to the royal household. Her late husband, Lord James Wyndham, had served as cultural advisor to the previous monarch, a position that granted the family unprecedented access to palace collections and archives. "Lady Catherine," Sarah began, placing a tablet on the table displaying photographs of the recovered artifacts. "We've now confirmed that 17 pieces from your luggage are officially listed as missing from the royal treasury. The total estimated value exceeds £12 million. This is far beyond what any single authentication mission would require." Catherine's response was measured and deliberate. "Detective, I understand how this must appear, but I assure you there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. These items were selected specifically because they required immediate expert analysis. Recent scholarship has raised questions about their provenance, and Queen Isabella herself expressed concern about potential forgeries in the collection." The explanation was sophisticated and detailed, suggesting careful preparation. However, Sarah had already spoken with the Queen's private office, and no such concerns had been officially documented. More troubling still, the palace's master catalog showed that several of the pieces had been photographed and verified as recently as 3 months ago. Marcus Thornfield entered the room carrying a folder thick with documentation. His preliminary analysis had revealed disturbing patterns in the artifact selection. "The pieces in your luggage represent a very specific subset of the royal collection," he explained to Catherine. "They're all highly portable, extremely valuable, and, notably, they all lack modern security tags that were installed throughout the collection last year." This detail struck Sarah as particularly significant. The security tag installation had been a palace-wide initiative following increased concerns about theft and forgery. The fact that Catherine had selected only untagged pieces suggested intimate knowledge of the palace security systems and inventory procedures. How would you know which pieces lacked security tags? Sarah asked directly. For the first time, Catherine hesitated. The question had clearly caught her off guard, and her answer came with noticeably less confidence. I believe Prince Alexander mentioned something about certain pieces being excluded from the new security measures due to their age and fragility. The mention of Prince Alexander prompted Sarah to examine the communication records between Catherine and the royal household. Phone logs revealed numerous calls between Catherine and the prince over the previous 6 weeks, often occurring late in the evening or early morning hours when palace staff would be minimal. Sir Geoffrey Blackwood returned with additional disturbing news. His thorough review of palace security footage had revealed something unexpected. Detective, we've discovered that Lady Catherine has been accessing restricted areas of the palace collections during her volunteer work, areas that require special authorization and are typically off-limits to non-staff members. The evidence was mounting systematically. Security footage showed Catherine in the royal treasury on multiple occasions, often accompanied by Prince Alexander. More concerning still, the timestamps of these visits corresponded exactly with the dates when various artifacts were last documented in their proper locations. Sarah decided to press harder on Catherine's relationship with Prince Alexander. Financial records obtained through court order revealed that the prince had accumulated substantial gambling debts over the past year. His creditors included some unsavory characters with connections to international art smuggling operations. Lady Catherine, we need to discuss Prince Alexander's financial situation and how it might relate to your current predicament, Sarah said, sliding across a summary of the prince's debt obligations. Our investigation shows he owes nearly £2 million to various creditors, some of whom have been known to accept valuable artwork as payment. Catherine's composure finally began to crack. The revelation of Alexander's debt details had clearly shaken her, suggesting she might not have been fully aware of the extent of his financial troubles. Her voice carried a new note of uncertainty when she responded. Alexander assured me that these items were being moved for legitimate purposes. He said the Queen had privately authorized their temporary removal for insurance evaluation. I trusted him completely. He's family, after all. This admission represented a significant shift in Catherine's story. She was now acknowledging Alexander's central role while attempting to position herself as an unwitting accomplice. However, Sarah's investigation had already revealed evidence that contradicted this narrative. Bank records showed that Catherine had recently opened several new accounts with Swiss financial institutions known for their discretion regarding high-value transactions. Additionally, her recent travel history included multiple trips to Geneva, London, and Dubai, cities with thriving markets for rare antiquities. Marcus provided another crucial piece of evidence. His examination of the artifact's wrapping materials revealed specialized preservation techniques typically known only to professional art dealers and museum curators. The level of care taken in packaging these pieces suggests someone with extensive experience in transporting valuable antiquities, he explained. This isn't the work of an amateur or someone acting under pressure. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Sarah's team intercepted communications between Prince Alexander and several known art dealers in Europe. Encrypted messages discussed special collections and referenced Swiss bank account numbers that matched those recently opened by Lady Catherine. Sarah confronted Catherine with this evidence. Your Swiss accounts received deposits totaling nearly £800,000 over the past 6 months. The timing of these deposits corresponds exactly with periods when artifacts were documented missing from the royal collection. How do you explain this pattern? Catherine's silence stretched uncomfortably long. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I think I need to speak with my solicitor before answering any more questions. The request for legal representation marked a turning point in the interrogation. Sarah recognized that Catherine was finally beginning to understand the seriousness of her situation and the strength of the evidence against her. However, the detective still needed to uncover the full scope of the operation and identify any additional conspirators. Sir Geoffrey returned with the most shocking revelation yet. His expanded inventory check had revealed that the theft operation was far more extensive than initially believed. Detective, we've now identified 43 missing pieces spanning the past 18 months. The total value approaches £25 million. This represents one of the largest art thefts in European history. The magnitude of the crime was staggering. Sarah realized she was dealing not with a desperate individual theft, but with a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been systematically looting the royal collection for over a year. The operation demonstrated detailed planning, insider knowledge, and international connections. As Catherine waited for her solicitor to arrive, Sarah began piecing together the broader conspiracy. Phone records revealed a network of communications between Alexander, Catherine, and several international art dealers. Financial records showed a complex web of transactions designed to obscure the movement of funds across multiple countries. The most disturbing aspect of the investigation was the realization that the theft operation was still active. Several additional pieces were scheduled to be authenticated in the coming weeks, suggesting that Catherine's arrest had interrupted a much larger criminal plan. As the second phase of the investigation concluded, Sarah faced the daunting task of unraveling an international art theft conspiracy while ensuring that no additional royal treasures disappeared. The stakes had escalated far beyond a simple airport security incident to a case that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The palace corridors had never felt more oppressive to Prince Alexander as he paced nervously in his private chambers. The news of Lady Catherine's arrest had reached him within hours, and he knew it was only a matter of time before investigators connected him to the missing artifacts. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed encrypted messages on his phone, each one representing another thread in the web of conspiracy that was rapidly unraveling. Detective Sarah Chun stood in the royal treasury with Sir Geoffrey Blackwood, surveying the extent of the theft operation that was becoming clearer with each passing hour. The missing pieces weren't randomly selected. They formed a carefully curated collection that told the story of Valdoria's royal heritage. Someone with intimate knowledge of the collection's historical significance had been choosing pieces that would be both valuable on the international market and devastating losses to the nation's cultural identity. The pattern is becoming clear, Sir Geoffrey explained as they examined empty display cases and vault spaces. The thief, or thieves, have been targeting pieces with the highest value-to-size ratio. These are items that could be easily transported but would command premium prices from private collectors who don't ask questions about provenance. Sarah studied the detailed inventory reports that Sir Geoffrey had prepared. The theft operation had been remarkably sophisticated, with pieces disappearing gradually over many months to avoid triggering immediate alarm. The thieves had even gone so far as to replace some items with skillfully crafted replicas, a detail that hadn't been discovered until the comprehensive audit began. This level of organization suggests we're dealing with professionals, Sarah observed. Someone with access to master craftsmen capable of creating convincing forgeries, international shipping networks, and buyers willing to pay premium prices for stolen royal artifacts. The investigation had expanded to include Interpol and art crime specialists from several European countries. The recovered communications between Prince Alexander and various international dealers revealed a network that stretched from London to Dubai, with connections to private collectors in Switzerland, Monaco, and several other countries known for their discretion regarding questionable acquisitions. Marcus Thornfield had been working around the clock to authenticate and catalog the recovered pieces while also examining the forgeries that had been left in their place. His expertise was proving invaluable in understanding the criminal methodology. "The quality of these replicas is extraordinary," he reported to Sarah. "Whoever created them has access to materials and techniques that are typically only available to major museums or restoration facilities." This revelation prompted Sarah to investigate connections between the royal household and various restoration and conservation services. The search revealed that Prince Alexander had been instrumental in recommending several new service providers over the past 2 years, including a Swiss firm specializing in discreet restoration services for private collections. The Swiss company, Alpine Conservation Services, had been granted extensive access to the royal collection under the pretense of conducting condition assessments and preventive treatments. Their detailed documentation of the collection had provided the perfect intelligence for planning the theft operation. Moreover, their legitimate business operations provided ideal cover for moving stolen artifacts through international shipping channels. Lady Catherine's solicitor, Margaret Hartwell, arrived at the airport detention facility to find her client in a state of controlled panic. Catherine had finally begun to grasp the full scope of the criminal enterprise she had become entangled in, and the realization was devastating. The sophisticated woman who had once moved effortlessly through royal social circles now faced the prospect of decades in prison. Margaret, I need you to understand, I never intended for this to escalate so far, Catherine confessed during their private consultation. Alexander convinced me that we were simply helping the royal collection by ensuring pieces receive proper authentication and conservation treatment. He said the profits would go toward palace maintenance and cultural programs. The solicitor reviewed the evidence that prosecutors had shared, and her expression grew increasingly grim. The financial records, communications, and physical evidence painted a picture of systematic theft operation rather than the misguided cultural preservation effort Catherine claimed to believe she was supporting. Catherine, the evidence suggests this operation has been ongoing for nearly 2 years and has involved dozens of stolen artifacts worth tens of millions of pounds. Whether you understood the full scope or not, you've been an essential participant in one of the largest art theft conspiracies in European history. Meanwhile, Prince Alexander was making desperate attempts to cover his tracks. His communications with Alpine Conservation Services and various international dealers took on an urgent tone as he tried to halt pending transactions and recall artifacts that were already in the international pipeline. However, his efforts only served to create additional evidence of his central role in the conspiracy. Sarah's team intercepted messages in which Alexander offered substantial payments to various parties in exchange for their silence. These attempted obstruction efforts only strengthened the case against him while revealing the extent of the criminal network. The prince's desperation had led him to make tactical errors that provided investigators with crucial evidence. Queen Isabella received a private briefing on the investigation's progress in her private study, a room lined with portraits of previous monarchs who had each contributed to the collection that was now being systematically plundered by her own nephew. The betrayal was not just criminal, but deeply personal, striking at the heart of the trust that made royal family relationships possible. Sir Geoffrey delivered the devastating news with characteristic diplomatic restraint. Your Majesty, our current assessment indicates that Prince Alexander has been orchestrating this operation for at least 18 months. The evidence suggests he recruited Lady Catherine approximately 6 months ago, likely when the operation required someone with regular access to social events where collection pieces were displayed. The Queen's response was measured but firm. Despite the personal pain of her nephew's betrayal, she understood that the integrity of the monarchy required that justice be served without consideration for family relationships. Sir Geoffrey, I want you to cooperate fully with Detective Chen's investigation. The royal family cannot be seen as above the law, regardless of how painful this situation may be personally. The investigation revealed that Prince Alexander's gambling addiction had been the initial catalyst for the theft operation. His debts to various international bookmakers and casino operators had escalated beyond his ability to pay through legitimate means. The decision to monetize access to the royal collection had been a calculated response to mounting pressure from increasingly dangerous creditors. Alpine Conservation Services proved to be the crucial link in the operation. The company's owner, Victor Zimmerman, had extensive connections to private collectors who specialized in acquiring questionable pieces for their personal collections. These collectors operated in a shadowy world where possession mattered more than legal ownership, and where stolen artifacts could be enjoyed privately without ever being publicly displayed. Sarah's international investigation revealed that several previously stolen artifacts from other European museums and private collections had also passed through the Alpine Conservation Services network. The royal theft operation was apparently just one component of a larger criminal enterprise that had been operating successfully for several years. The evidence against Prince Alexander was mounting rapidly. Financial forensics revealed a complex web of offshore accounts and shell companies designed to launder the proceeds from artifact sales. The sophistication of the money laundering operation suggested professional criminal assistance, raising the possibility of connections to organized crime. As the third phase of the investigation concluded, Sarah realized that the airport security incident that had begun this case was actually the culmination of an international criminal conspiracy that had been years in the planning. The arrest of Lady Catherine had been the thread that, when pulled, unraveled an entire tapestry of royal betrayal and international art crime. The next phase would require coordinating with law enforcement agencies across multiple countries to ensure that all conspirators were brought to justice and that as many stolen artifacts as possible were recovered before they disappeared permanently into private collections around the world. The morning briefing at Interpol's Lyon headquarters buzzed with an energy typically reserved for major terrorism cases. Detective Sarah Chun found herself at the center of an international investigation that now spanned 7 countries, and involved law enforcement agencies she had never imagined working with. The royal artifact theft case had evolved from an airport security incident into one of the most significant art crime investigations in European history. Agent Pierre Dumont of the French National Police presented the latest intelligence on Alpine Conservation Services and their network of criminal associates. The Swiss company had been under surveillance for several months as part of a separate investigation into stolen Mediterranean antiquities, but the royal theft case had provided the evidence needed to move against the entire operation. Victor Zimmermann has been running Alpine Conservation as a front for international art trafficking for at least 5 years, Agent Dumont explained to the assembled task force. Our surveillance has identified regular shipments to private collectors in Monaco, Dubai, and several Caribbean territories known for their banking discretion and minimal oversight of art transactions. The scope of the criminal network was staggering. Financial analysis had revealed transactions totaling over €60 million over the past 3 years, with pieces from museums and private collections across Europe being funneled through the Alpine Conservation pipeline. The royal artifacts were just the most recent and politically sensitive component of a much larger operation. Sarah reviewed intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture of how easily valuable cultural artifacts could be stolen and sold in the international market. Private collectors with more money than scruples created a demand that criminal organizations were happy to supply. The anonymity provided by various banking jurisdictions and free trade zones made tracking stolen goods extremely difficult once they entered the international pipeline. Prince Alexander's arrest warrant had been issued, but executing it proved complicated by diplomatic protocols and the international attention the case was receiving. The prince had fled to a private estate in Switzerland, where his status as a royal family member created complex legal challenges for extradition proceedings. His lawyers were arguing that he should be granted diplomatic immunity, while Valdoria's government insisted that such protections didn't extend to criminal activities. Lady Catherine's continued cooperation with investigators was proving invaluable in mapping the extent of the conspiracy. During extended debriefing sessions, she provided detailed information about the operation's methodology and timeline. Her insider perspective revealed how systematically the thieves had studied the royal collection and palace security procedures. Alexander spent months studying the collection inventory and security protocols, Catherine revealed during one particularly productive session. He knew exactly which pieces lacked modern security tags and which storage areas had limited surveillance coverage. The operation was planned with almost military precision. The investigation had uncovered evidence that Alpine Conservation Services had been infiltrating cultural institutions across Europe for years. Victor Zimmermann's company had legitimate contracts with dozens of museums and private collections, providing perfect cover for intelligence gathering and identifying potential targets. The business model was diabolically clever: provide real conservation services while simultaneously casing collections for future theft operations. Marcus Thornfield had been working with international experts to identify other stolen pieces that might have passed through the Alpine network. His analysis of transaction records and shipping documents revealed patterns that suggested dozens of additional thefts that hadn't yet been reported by their victims. Many private collectors and smaller museums were reluctant to admit they had been victimized, fearing damage to their reputations and security protocols. The technological aspects of the investigation required specialized expertise from cybercrime units. The criminals had used sophisticated encryption and cryptocurrency transactions to obscure their financial activities. Breaking these digital security measures required court orders in multiple jurisdictions and cooperation from various financial institutions and technology companies. Sarah traveled to Geneva to coordinate with Swiss authorities who were preparing to raid Alpine Conservation Services and several associated storage facilities. The timing of the operation was critical. Intelligence suggested that several major shipments were scheduled to move within the next 48 hours, potentially taking stolen artifacts beyond the reach of European law enforcement. The Swiss raid was executed with precision at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Teams simultaneously hit the main Alpine Conservation facility, 3 storage warehouses, and Victor Zimmermann's private residence. The discoveries exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of the investigation team. The main facility contained a sophisticated operation that combined legitimate conservation work with illegal activities. Hidden behind false walls were climate-controlled storage areas containing hundreds of stolen artifacts from across Europe. The inventory included pieces that museums hadn't even realized were missing, along with items that had been reported stolen years earlier with no leads on their whereabouts. Victor Zimmerman's personal files revealed the full scope of his criminal empire. Detailed catalogs showed photographs and provenance information for thousands of stolen pieces, along with client lists of collectors who had purchased items knowing they were stolen. The evidence would provide investigators with leads that could result in recovery operations for years to come. The financial records discovered during the raid painted a picture of an operation that generated tens of millions in annual revenue. Zimmerman had been living an extravagant lifestyle funded entirely by cultural theft, with properties in Switzerland, Monaco, and the Caribbean. His arrest netted assets that investigators hoped could be liquidated to compensate victims of the theft operation. Prince Alexander's situation became increasingly desperate as Swiss authorities moved to freeze his assets and initiate extradition proceedings. His lawyers' attempts to claim diplomatic immunity were failing as Valdoria's government made clear that they would not protect him from prosecution. The prince's desperation led to increasingly erratic behavior that only strengthened the case against him. The international cooperation required to dismantle the theft network demonstrated both the challenges and possibilities of modern law enforcement. While criminals could operate across borders with relative ease, the response from law enforcement agencies proved that international cooperation could be equally effective when properly coordinated. Recovery operations began immediately as investigators worked to identify the rightful owners of hundreds of stolen artifacts. The process would require extensive authentication and documentation, but the prospect of returning stolen cultural treasures to their proper locations provided motivation for the complex international effort. Sarah found herself coordinating with colleagues from France, Switzerland, Germany, and several other countries as the investigation expanded to pursue additional leads. Each recovered artifact seemed to reveal new connections and potential cases, suggesting that the full scope of international art crime was far larger than anyone had previously estimated. The media attention surrounding the case brought welcome scrutiny to the international art market and its vulnerability to criminal exploitation. Cultural institutions around the world began reviewing their security protocols and authentication procedures, while governments discussed stronger international cooperation frameworks for preventing art theft. As the fourth phase of the investigation concluded, Sarah reflected on how a routine airport security check had uncovered a criminal network that had been operating successfully for years. The case demonstrated that even the most sophisticated criminal operations could be vulnerable to careful investigation and international cooperation. The next phase would focus on bringing all identified conspirators to justice, while continuing recovery efforts for the hundreds of stolen artifacts that had been identified. The work would take years to complete, but the foundations had been laid for dismantling one of Europe's most successful art theft operations. The courtroom in Valdoria's High Court of Justice had never hosted a case with such international significance and royal implications. 6 months after Lady Catherine's arrest at the airport, the trial that would determine the fate of the royal theft conspiracy was finally beginning. Detective Sarah Chun sat in the witness gallery, reflecting on the investigation that had consumed her life and ultimately reshaped international cooperation in art crime enforcement. Prince Alexander sat in the defendant's dock, his once commanding royal presence now diminished by months of legal proceedings and public disgrace. The extradition from Switzerland had taken 4 months to complete, during which time additional evidence had continued to accumulate against him. His appearance had changed dramatically. The confident royal who had once moved effortlessly through palace social events now appeared haggard and defeated. Lady Catherine had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for her continued cooperation with authorities. Her testimony would be crucial in establishing the timeline and methodology of the theft operation, but her decision to cooperate had come at the cost of admitting her central role in the conspiracy. She would face significant prison time, but her cooperation had earned her a reduced sentence compared to what she might have received at trial. The prosecution's case, led by Crown Prosecutor James Wellington, methodically presented the evidence that had been gathered during the international investigation. Financial records, communication intercepts, and physical evidence painted a comprehensive picture of a criminal operation that had systematically looted the royal collection while operating under the guise of cultural preservation and authentication. Members of the jury, Wellington addressed the panel during his opening statement. This case represents not just theft, but a betrayal of the public trust and cultural heritage that these defendants were sworn to protect. The evidence will show that Prince Alexander and Lady Catherine engaged in a sophisticated criminal enterprise that treated our nation's most precious artifacts as mere commodities to be sold to the highest bidder. Victor Zimmermann's trial was proceeding simultaneously in Switzerland, where authorities had uncovered evidence of his involvement in art theft operations across multiple countries. His conviction on numerous charges related to trafficking stolen cultural property had resulted in a 25-year prison sentence and forfeiture of assets worth over 40 million euros. His cooperation with international authorities had led to additional arrests and recovery operations across Europe. The recovery effort had become a massive international undertaking. Over 800 stolen artifacts had been identified and recovered from various locations around the world. Museums, private collectors, and auction houses had voluntarily returned pieces once their stolen status was confirmed, though some cases required lengthy legal proceedings to force repatriation. Queen Isabella had personally overseen the return of recovered royal artifacts to their proper places in the collection. The emotional impact of seeing stolen treasures return to their rightful locations was profound for the monarch, who viewed the collection not just as valuable objects but as tangible connections to centuries of royal history and national identity. Marcus Thornfield had been appointed to lead a comprehensive review of authentication and security procedures for royal and cultural collections throughout Europe. His expertise had proven invaluable not just in the investigation, but in developing new protocols to prevent similar thefts in the future. The review had resulted in recommendations for enhanced security measures, improved authentication procedures, and better international cooperation mechanisms. The trial revealed disturbing details about how easily cultural institutions could be infiltrated by criminals posing as legitimate service providers. Alpine Conservation Services had gained access to sensitive areas of dozens of museums and private collections by establishing credibility through genuine conservation work before beginning their theft operations. Sarah's testimony provided the jury with a detailed account of how the investigation had uncovered the conspiracy and tracked the stolen artifacts through international networks. Her professional demeanor and thorough documentation of evidence made a strong impression on the jury, who seemed particularly affected by the scope and sophistication of the criminal operation. The defense attorneys for Prince Alexander attempted to portray their client as a victim of gambling addiction who had made poor decisions under pressure from criminal associates. However, the evidence of systematic planning and the prince's central role in recruiting accomplices undermined arguments that he was merely a desperate individual making impulsive choices. Lady Catherine's testimony proved devastating to Prince Alexander's defense. Her detailed account of how the prince had recruited her and planned the theft operation contradicted his lawyer's attempts to minimize his involvement. Her description of the systematic way artifacts were selected and prepared for theft demonstrated clear premeditation and extensive criminal planning. The international implications of the case had prompted discussions at the highest levels of government about strengthening legal frameworks for protecting cultural heritage. The European Union had begun developing new initiatives for tracking and protecting artistic and cultural artifacts, while international law enforcement agencies had created permanent task forces for combating art crime. Private collectors who had unknowingly purchased stolen artifacts faced difficult decisions about returning pieces to their rightful owners. While most collectors cooperated voluntarily once the stolen status was confirmed, some cases required legal action to force repatriation. The process had raised important questions about due diligence requirements in the art market and the responsibilities of collectors to verify the provenance of their acquisitions. The financial investigation had revealed that the criminal operation had generated over 70 million euros in illegal revenue over its operational period. Asset forfeiture proceedings were ongoing in multiple jurisdictions, with recovered funds being used to compensate victims and support enhanced security measures for cultural institutions. The trial's conclusion came after 3 weeks of testimony and evidence presentation. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges against Prince Alexander. His conviction on charges including conspiracy to commit theft, money laundering, and trafficking in stolen cultural property resulted in a sentence of 18 years in prison and complete forfeiture of his royal titles and privileges. The impact of the case extended far beyond the individual defendants. The royal family had been forced to confront the reality that their trust had been betrayed by one of their own members, leading to significant changes in how family members' access to royal collections and facilities was managed and monitored. Cultural institutions around the world had implemented new security protocols based on lessons learned from the investigation. Enhanced background checking for service providers, improved inventory management systems, and stronger international cooperation mechanisms were among the changes implemented to prevent similar criminal operations. The recovered artifacts required extensive conservation and authentication work before being returned to their display locations. The process provided opportunities for detailed study and documentation that enhanced understanding of the piece's historical and cultural significance. Several pieces that had been damaged during their time in criminal custody required careful restoration work. Sarah's role in the investigation had earned her international recognition and led to her appointment to a new Interpol task force focused on art crime prevention. The experience had demonstrated the importance of international cooperation in combating sophisticated criminal operations that operated across multiple jurisdictions. The case had also highlighted the vulnerability of cultural heritage to criminal exploitation and the need for continued vigilance in protecting artifacts that represented irreplaceable connections to human history and identity. The successful prosecution and recovery effort provided a model for future cases while demonstrating that even the most sophisticated criminal operations could be defeated through careful investigation and international cooperation. As the legal proceedings concluded and recovered artifacts were returned to their proper locations, the case stood as both a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of cultural heritage and a testament to the effectiveness of international cooperation in combating art crime. The royal treasures had been saved, but the lessons learned would continue to influence efforts to protect cultural heritage for generations to come. The investigation that began with a routine airport security check had evolved into one of the most significant art crime cases in modern history, demonstrating that vigilance and cooperation could triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. The crown jewels were secure, but the fight to protect cultural heritage would continue as an ongoing international priority.